This is the Thursday, July 11th, 2013 meeting of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. Would you call the roll, please?
Timothy Biggs.
Here.
Dean Cars.
Here.
Jeff Ron.
Here.
Dale Patrick.
Here.
John Dunham. Deanna Willard. Stephanie Eicher.
Here.
Jason Hart.
Here.
Lisa Dole.
Here.
Thank you. As you may or may not know, we are without a chair and a vice chair this evening. So I would entertain a motion to elect a new chair for this evening's meeting only. Willing to open it up for nominations and speech, or we can just appoint someone? Mr. Vig.
Mr. Cars, I'd like to nominate you to fill in the role as chair for this evening's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Is there a second?
I'm in agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Is there any opposition? Seeing none, I will act as chair this evening. Moving on our agenda, we have no minutes before us this evening. Special order of business, disclosures. Do we have any disclosures this evening?
I have some disclosures.
Ms. Dell, could you use your request to speak button, please? And I'll, Mr. Patrick.
Yeah, I'd like to disclose I was not present at the last meeting, and I will be abstaining from voting on the resolutions.
On the two resolutions before us this evening. Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. For the record, I need to leave this evening at 8:15 p.m., and it's not just because the sun's shining.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Ms. Dole.
I'd like to make a couple of disclosures. First, for the case number 2013-039, the petitioner of Corporate Leasing LLC is a client of my firm. One of the partners in my firm is here today and representing them, and I have done work for this client relating to the specific parcel on which this variance request is being made. I also want to make a disclosure with regard to case number 2013-099. The petitioner is Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. My firm had a matter representing them that was closed in 2004, but has ongoing matters where we're representing clients who have either obtained or sought loans from the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, or has had other dealings with them, like the subordinations of deeds of trust, and also there's an open matter involving a bankruptcy where Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is a party. I have not worked on those except that I have done work for one of those clients on a matter that's unrelated to the matter or the property before us. If there's any questions or further, I would be happy to elaborate.
Thank you, Ms. Dole. Perhaps we could, are there any questions of Ms. Dole by the board members? I do have two questions. With regard to case 2013-039, would you say that you have a substantial financial interest or substantial private interest in the matter now before the body with respect to that case?
It would not affect my financial interest. I would prefer not to do the case. I don't think I would have a substantial private interest, but I have, I see, I am in contact with the person in my firm all the time, and like I said, I have done some work for this client,
Th-
for the petitioner.
Understood. Thank you, Ms. Dole. And with respect to case 2013-099, would you say that you have a substantial financial interest or substantial private interest
No,
in the matter?
I don't have either.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Ms. Dole this evening? Then perhaps we can take up her disclosures with respect to each of the individual cases. And could I have a motion to direct, with respect to case 2013-039, could I have a motion to direct Ms. Dole to participate? Mr. Ron.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Vig, you've indicated you would second that motion. Thank you. Is there any discussion, Mr. Ron?
I don't, Mr. Chair. No.
Thank you. And I guess for the record, I would concur with Ms. Dole's statement and wishes that she not participate in that case, and we'll be voting in the negative for that motion. Please vote. That motion fails by a vote of 6-0. With respect to case 2013-099, could I please have a motion to direct Ms. Dole to participate? Mr. Vig.
Move Ms. Dole to participate in case 2013-099.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Patrick, you've indicated you would second that motion?
I second it.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Vig, any discussion?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Patrick?
No comments.
Thank you. That's the case. Please vote. Mr. Thank you. That motion passes by a vote of 5-1. Mr. Vig, getting back to disclosures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also with regard to case 2013-039, I would like to disclose that the petitioner is a partner in a firm that represents my firm at times, and he personally has handled a number of matters for us over the years on an infrequent basis, but I did want to disclose that. And also with regard to case 2013-099, my firm does work for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. Small projects here and there, and not typically small projects, not on this particular site or this project, but in general we do work for the organization.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. With respect to case 2013-039, do you feel you have a substantial financial interest or private interest in the matter now before the body?
No to either.
No to either one of the cases. Thank you, Mr. Vig. With that, with respect to case 2013-039, could I have a positive motion directing Mr. Vig to participate, please? Ms. Eicher, you've indicated.
I would move to direct Mr. Vig to participate in case 2013-039.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick, you seconded that?
Second it.
Thank you. Is there any discussion by any of the board members? If not, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 5-0. With respect to 2013-099, could I have a motion to direct Mr. Vig to participate, please? Mr. Patrick.
Yes, in case of 213-099, I would direct Mr. Vig to participate.
Thank you. Ms. Eicher, you've indicated you have seconded that?
I do.
Thank you. Is there any discussion by any of the board members? If not, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 5-0. Are there any other disclosures this evening? Any other disclosures by any of the board members? Seeing none, we're moving on to our consent agenda. We have two resolutions before us this evening, Resolution 2013-007 and Resolution 2013-008 for approval. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, please? Mr. Vig, you've indicated you'd move to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Ms. Eicher. You've indicated you would second that. Is there anyone wishing to pull any of the agenda, the consent agenda? If not, could we vote on approval of the consent agenda, please? That motion passes by a vote of 6-0. Moving on our agenda, we have no appearance requests this evening. There's no unfinished business or regular agenda items. That brings us to our public hearings this evening. Before we get into our cases, for the record, we have two cases this evening. In order for a variance to be granted, there must be a vote by the majority of the fully constituted board in favor of passing that variance. The fully constituted board consists of 9 members, so in order for a variance to be granted, 5 members must vote in favor of the variance. With Ms. Dole abstaining from case 2013-039, we'll have 6 members hearing that case this evening. 5 of the 6 members must be voting in favor of that. In case people are curious, we will not have a short board. A short board is a 5-member board. So typically if we have a short board, a postponement, it can be offered to the petitioner if they so wish, but we will not have a short board, so we will be hearing that case this evening. With that, I'd like to go through the order of business for our variance hearings this evening. The chair shall introduce the variance and explain the procedure to be followed. The variance case number and the name of the applicant shall be read into the record. The board shall hear and rule on any objections to the sufficiency of notice. The board shall hear a brief staff presentation outlining the variance not to exceed 10 minutes. On conclusion of the staff presentation, the board members and the applicant may then direct questions to the staff through the chair. The applicant shall give his or her presentation not to exceed 10 minutes. Throughout the proceedings, the burden of proof rests upon the applicant, who must convince the board by a preponderance of the evidence that the variance should be granted. On conclusion of the applicant's presentation, the board members and the staff may then direct questions to the applicant through the chair. The hearing shall then be open for public testimony. Each person has 3 minutes. Representatives of groups have 5 minutes. All persons who testify may be questioned by the board, staff, or the applicant. On conclusion of the public testimony, the staff, followed by the applicant, shall have the right of rebuttal. The board shall proceed to develop oral findings and conclusions with regard to the variance and disposition of the variance. The staff shall reduce the oral findings and conclusions to writing for subsequent adoption by the board at a later meeting. The matter then rests with the board, and the chair asks for a positive motion from the board. Our first case this evening is case 2013-039. Ms. Dole, you've indicated you'd be abstaining, so you get to spend some time in the lovely room in the back, and we'll call you when the next case is to be heard. Thank you. Is the petitioner for 2013-039 corporate leasing here, or their representative? They've indicated so. Could staff provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
Mr. Chair, 51 public hearing notices were mailed out on June 18th. None were returned with comment.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Could you proceed with your presentation?
The request before the board tonight is concerns Anchorage Original Town Site Subdivision Block 49, Tract A, Fragment Lot 3. The request before the board is a variance to allow a reduction in required lot size in the B2A district. At the time the site was replatted and the fragment lot site plan approved, the site was developed with the Reeve building, which was built in 1967. The B2A district requires a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. The applicant is requesting allowance to reduce the minimum allowed lot size of the fragment lot from 6,000 square feet to 2,500 square feet. Moving on to the findings, as for standard number 1, this standard is not substantially met. This site has been developed since 1967, and there are no physical constraints that have limited the development of this property. Standard number 2, this standard is not substantially met. This property has existed in its current configuration since it was platted in 1986. The lot is not constrained by physical conditions that have limited the ability of the applicant to develop and make use of the property. Standard number 3, the standard is not substantially met. The applicant is seeking a zoning solution to enable the building owner to purchase the land associated with the building. There has been no restriction on development of the property. A variance is not the proper vehicle to resolve the desire of a building owner to acquire the land beneath the building. This variance request is a matter of convenience, as the building owner wishes to also own the property associated with the building. This desire does not constitute valid grounds for a variance approval. This request would be similar to a leasee of a unit in a strip mall that wished to purchase the land under their unit. This issue should be carefully considered, as it could set a precedent such that any other property owner with similar site conditions should be able to obtain a similar variance. Standard 4. This standard is substantially met. The variance will not give the property special privileges. It will not increase traffic in the area, nor will it change the character of the downtown commercial district. Standard 5. This standard is substantially met. The Reeve building has been in this location since 1967, and its character and use will not change. Standard 6. This variance is substantially met. Standard 7. This standard is not substantially met. As noted above, the land has been in use since the building was constructed in 1967. Granting the variance would not change or increase a reasonable use of the land. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Are there any recommendations if we were to approve the
Yes, and
variance?
they're under number 1 on page 6.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Ron.
Thank you through the chair. Ms. Ferguson, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that a variance request in the department's opinion is not the appropriate vehicle for remedy in this case. Does the department have a position on what the appropriate vehicle or vehicles might be?
No, we don't really have a solution to the issue. It seems it's more of a, it's a real estate sort of issue. It's not something that, is solved through the variance process.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? As a follow-up to Mr. Ron, so when you say it's real estate, it's a preference on ownership, land ownership? Okay. Are there other questions? Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question, Ms. Ferguson. How did the case come before us? What's the backstory or history?
It was due to the request by the owner wanting to somehow resolve this issue and looking at a variance as a possible vehicle to do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Thank you, sir. Just in my mind, to make sure I understand this correctly, so the Fifth Avenue Mall owns the land, but the corporate leasing owns the building.
Through the chair, Mr. Hart, yes, that's correct.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chair?
You bet.
If that's the case, is it plausible for corporate leasing to apply for a variance on behalf of another individual that owns the land?
I'm not certain what you're...
I'm not sure if someone else could translate my question better than I can, but if you can, I would appreciate it.
Well, I'll attempt it. Corporate leasing doesn't own the land, and yet they are the ones that are applying for this variance. Is the land owner supposed to be the applicant in a case like this?
Exactly, sir.
That's a good question. Yes, we don't have anything in the packet to indicate that the landowner has agreed to this or is even aware of this.
Yeah, Mr. Hart.
I don't know how other board members feel, but personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable hearing this entire case without knowing that the owner of the land is actually in an agreement with this, personally.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Ms. Eicher.
I agree with Mr. Hart. I had a question as to standing, and if the corporate leasing was the proper petitioner in this matter. I didn't see anything in the packet of information that we were given to indicate that the owner of the Fifth Avenue Mall was also requesting the same.
Ms. Ferguson, do you have anything in your files that indicate the ownership or authority of the representative or corporate leasing to apply for this?
Mr. Chair, we do not have a letter of authorization from the landowner.
The landowners.
Mr. Chair, I can say that I was in telephone contact with the manager for the Fifth Avenue Mall, and he knew about it because of our sending, public hearing notices to everyone in the area. But he had said that he had had no contact with corporate leasing.
Thank you. Mr. Vig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder, as a point of order, if there's an opportunity to ask the applicant if he has any documents that he's bringing with him that weren't in the packet.
Yes, often we've had at least the applicant's representative, if it's not in the packet, they've at least had that. I'm assuming the applicant's representative or the petitioner's representative is walking forward now. Could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Tim Potter with Dal HKM. With me tonight, is John Dawson, attorney for corporate leasing. And unequivocally, I can tell you that there was a letter of authorization from Simon Properties submitted to the city with the application. Why it's not in the packet, I do not know. We do have capability of going to our office, which is about a 2-minute run, and getting that out of our files. And as far as communication with Simon, I know Mr. Dawson would love to answer that question himself, if necessary, that in fact it was understood that we could not go forward without their authorization, and we do have a letter of authorization. The other thing that's been interesting in the presentation by staff, and I'll get to the rest of it later in our presentation as we go forward, is that, just lost my thought. No, I lost it. Sorry.
That's okay, Mr. Potter. We're just dealing with whether or not we can hear this case this evening, so you'll have an ample opportunity to make your presentation.
Sure, and if in fact it's an issue and you feel you have to have that letter in front of you evidenced, since it's not been provided, even though it was submitted, we will go to the office, grab it. If you would like to push our case to the second case on the agenda, we will have that back in front of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Potter. And then that would be provided to staff. Ms. Ferguson, from your experience, is that sufficient to have the ownership of the determined, and that we rightfully can hear this case this evening then?
If we had the letter of authorization.
Thank you. How about this? Should we entertain a motion to change our agenda and perhaps hear this case second? And then that would give the applicant the opportunity to get the necessary documentation. Then if they don't, we will move on. Understood. Mr. Ron?
Mr. Chair, I'll hold that comment that I have until we discuss the motion that's made. Thank you.
So I guess we have two options in front of us. One is we started this case, but we can't hear the case, so we are either postponing it or we're postponing it, I think. Postpone at the end of the meeting or postpone it this evening. Unless a board member sees another option for us. But could I would entertain a motion. Yes, Ms. Eicher.
I'm not ready to put forth a motion, but I still have question in my mind, even if the applicant brings a letter saying that the owner of the parcel understands that the petitioner has put forward this request for a variance. I'm uncertain as to what the rules are. Does the petitioner have to be the landowner, I guess is my question. Does the petitioner have standing to request this variance if they're not the owner of the land? And if someone can enlighten me on that, I'd feel more comfortable hearing this case. But
sure. Thank you. Staff, could you respond to the question?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Eicher? Eicher, okay.
like hiker without the H.
Okay. The property owner does not necessarily have to be the petitioner. A petitioner can represent the property owner under a letter of authorization from the property owner. The property owner does have to know, they do have to provide a letter of authorization. It can be an interested party that is seeking the variance in order to accomplish something, and it's the letter of authorization that is critical. So to let the municipality and the board know that the property owner is aware of this action and has consented to allow this action to go forward on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you.
And I apologize for mispronouncing your name, Ms. Eicher. Mr. Ron?
Mr. Chair, if appropriate to do so, I make a motion that we postpone case number 2013-039 until the next regular board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Could I have a second, please? Mr. Patrick. Mr. Ron, would you care to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I elected to postpone until the next regular board meeting, as I do need to leave at 8:15, which would put us in a short board situation with Board Member Dole sitting this case out. But open to discussion if you guys want to hear it tonight.
And that was, I appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Ron. We're going to be, I would doubt that we would be able to hear two cases and act on it before this evening. Historically, when we've had a short board, we've kind of asked the petitioner their thoughts on that. I'd like to perhaps hear from the applicant, what we're assuming to be the petitioner's representative, once we get the paperwork on postponing this till the next meeting. Mr. Potter, could you come forward, please? Mr. Potter, I'm assuming you understand the situation we're in, that we're most likely going to be in a short board situation once we hear the case this evening, if we were to hear the case this evening.
I understand that, and we are fully prepared to present the case tonight, and we will bring that letter of authorization. I appreciate the issue of the short board. When is the August meeting? What is the date?
Just 1 minute. August 8th.
And my problem is that I have an annual family getaway on the Oregon coast, family reunion every year. And let's see, I was delaying it because I would have gone out Friday night before that week starts. And now P&Z has lumped something from Monday night over to that Monday. So I was going to delay my flight a couple of days. And this would give me, if I flew out on Tuesday, then I'd need to be back by Thursday for this meeting. So that is a bit of a hardship. I would ask, you're looking at it from the standpoint of we are ready to go tonight. If we can produce a letter, I believe you'll have that before you're done with the next case. And we are prepared to go forward tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Thank you. With that, our discussion is on the motion with respect to postponing this case till the next board meeting. Is there additional discussion by the board members?
To commiserate with Mr. Potter, I'll actually be on the Oregon coast on August 8th as well.
Got it. Additional discussion? Mr. Patrick.
Just FYI, I'm going to be in California August 8th.
Thank you. Ms. Ferguson?
What I want to say is that it's a possibility that if we do reorder the agenda, they could come back and be the second case. In the meantime, Mr. Potter can run to his office and find the letter and come back, and the board could still deal with it as a short board with 5 members tonight if they decide to do that, and that's Mr. Potter agrees to that.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Mr. Ron?
Mr. Chair, I think the petitioner was fairly clear in accepting the short board presentation tonight, so I would entertain a motion to amend my motion to direct the board to just reorder the agenda for tonight.
Thank you, and then we would table this case until the end of the evening then. Mr. Patrick, you seconded the original motion. Do you have any objection to that?
No objection.
Is there additional discussion? Any of the board members? If not, please please vote on the motion to table this. The motion to table the case till the and possibly reorder the agenda has passed. That brings us to case 2013-099. And could Ms. Dole, Ms. O'Brien or Ms. Ferguson, could you go get Ms. Dole and bring her back in for this case? Our next case is 2013-099. The applicant is the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, Representative Alan Rode with Rode and Associates. Is the petitioner here this evening? Applicant and petitioner. They've indicated so. Could staff provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 86 public hearing notices were mailed on June 18th. 4 notices were returned unclaimed. 2 comments were returned expressing concerns with the variance request, and they were printed in the packet. This variance request is to allow construction of a 4-unit residential structure on a 9,688 square foot lot in the R2M district. The lot does not meet the required minimum 11,000 square foot lot size for a 4-unit structure. The petition site, Lot 2, Block 1, Muldoon Heights subdivision, is located east of Boston Street, west of Friendly Lane, and north of East 11th Court. The same variance request came before the zoning board and was denied on December 8th, 2011. The petition site and surrounding property, as mentioned, is zoned R2M. The predominant land use is single and 2-family residential uses, interspersed with some triplexes and vacant lots as well. The proposal is to construct a fourplex with a 2,986 square foot of living space with a lot coverage of 1,452 square feet, requiring 7 parking spaces, inclusive of overflow parking. In reviewing the standards, Standard 1 does not appear to be met. The special conditions of the land must arise from the physical conditions of the land itself, according to an Alaska Supreme Court decision. These special conditions must distinguish it from other land in the general area in the same zoning district. However, the petition site is rectangular in shape, as are the other lots in the subdivision. The 9,688 square foot lot size is equivalent or similar to the other 73 lots in the same subdivision that range between 8,404 square feet up to 14,311 square feet. The lot does decline in elevation slightly, with an estimated average slope of 7%. However, the lot is not impacted by wetlands or streams or other environmental features that would limit the development potential of the property. Standard 2 also is not substantially met. Special conditions related to the physical characteristics of the land were not found to exist in comparison with other lots in the surrounding area in the same zoning district. Likewise, Standard 3 is not substantially met. The reasons presented by the applicant for granting a variance to the relate to the regulatory reasons that do not permit a rezone of the property, and the fact that the lot is 13.9% larger than needed for a triplex structure. However, these arguments do not address the physical characteristics of the property, which appear to be similar to the other lots in the surrounding area and zoning district in terms of size, shape, and lack of environmental limitations. Standard 4 does appear to be met. Based on the site plan, the proposed development appears to conform to the requirements of Title 21 in terms of lot coverage, usable yard area per dwelling unit, number of required parking spaces, and providing vehicular turning and maneuvering on site. Standard 5 also appears to be substantially met. The proposed development is a permitted use in the R2M zoning district. Standard 6 appears to be met. If granted, the variance would have a positive effect on the health, safety, and welfare for people in the municipality. Substandard housing has been eliminated. There was formerly a triplex on the property. It was determined to be not habitable, and it has been demolished. And affordable housing would be provided for an underserved portion of the population. Standard 7 appears to be partially met, as the petitioner has presented a design that minimizes the building footprint, meets the parking, usable yard, and turning and maneuvering requirements of Title 21. However, cannot be said that denial of the variance results in the denial of all reasonable use of the property, as a 3-unit structure can be constructed in a conforming manner on the petition site. So as only 3 of the 7 standards appear to be substantially met, the department must recommend denial. If at the conclusion of the public hearing the board does in fact find the standards have all been substantially met, there are 2 conditions on page 10 of the packet that are provided for the board's consideration during their deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Are there any questions of staff by the board?
Yes. Let's see.
Yes, Ms. Dole.
I understand that a variance request came before this board and was denied by this board. And if that's the case, what's the authority or what allows the petitioner, are they bringing a different variance request? Because I thought that after the board, if the board made a decision, that was a final decision and it could be appealed, but if it was not appealed, can a petitioner bring a new variance request, and is this for the same thing that was requested before or different?
Through the chair, Ms. Dole, this is the exact same variance that came before the zoning board. A resolution on pages 53 and 54 of the packet summarizes the determination the board made at the time subsequent or after the public hearing was held. It was denied. I believe the difference is that the site plan has been submitted to demonstrate, I'm assuming, I don't know, but the site plan has been submitted to demonstrate the size of the structure, what it would look like. There's a photograph. I did make 11 by 17 copies of their site plan. I hope you folks all received those with your packet. Oh, good. And to show that that they basically can meet all of the required standards in terms of parking, what was mentioned during the presentation. And I think that is what the new evidence is. There is nothing in Title 21. I agree, once the board has denied it, an appeal could have been made to Superior Court, but there's nothing in the code that prohibits requesting the variance again, and they've supplied new information for the board's consideration.
So Ms. O'Brien, staff has looked at the application, the information, and felt that it's warranted bringing it before this board, I guess is what maybe I'm restating Ms. Dole's question, but it's not the board's decision to decide whether or not we hear the case. Staff has accepted the application and made conditions bringing it before us as a new variance hearing. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chair, the application was submitted because of I don't know why it was accepted, but it was accepted. It's the same variance request. It's for 4 units, and all I can tell is that there's new information with this site plan, which wasn't submitted with the previous application.
Excuse me. Ms. Dole, do you have any other questions?
I guess I just want to be sure you're saying it's the exact same request that was made previously. It just there's more information than there was previously that's being provided by the petitioner?
Yes, the lot size remains the same, the number of units remains the same, and the requirement for 11,000 square foot lot size for 4 unit remains the same. So it's the same variance request. It's the same variance request with a little bit more information.
Are there any other questions this evening? I mean, are there any other questions of Ms. O'Brien? Mr. Vig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. O'Brien, I remember this case when it came before us before, and I believe that at the time, even if there had not been the information that's provided tonight, that we would have required, had it been passed, that there was a similar condition attached to it, that site plan review and approval of parking requirements and all that would have happened. Would that not be the case? I mean, once we grant the variance, it still has to go through a process to demonstrate that it meets parking requirements and open space and setbacks and all that good stuff.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vig, that's correct. There were no conditions because it was a denial the last time. If circumstances changed and this was to go forward, then they would have to meet all the other standards, other than the minimum lot size, which is what they're requesting a variance for.
Right. I guess my point was that even though we didn't have the information before, they would have still had to comply with the requirements in place.
That is, yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vig. That's correct, Mr. Vig.
Are there any other questions of staff by the board? I know each case is supposed to stand on its own. I've been here a while. I believe, Ms. O'Brien, is it your understanding that this site plan has changed significantly from what was submitted in the 2011 case?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the case file for the 2011 case, and I don't know, there were not these types of site plans that were submitted at that time, unless I'm in error and I can be corrected. I don't think the circumstances have changed regarding the actual request.
Okay. My second question, page 27 of the staff packet, there's a statement in the applicant's submittal under item 2, first paragraph below item 2, their last sentence, allowing this variance has been supported by the Northeast Community Council and the Municipality of Anchorage Director of Community Development, Jerry Weaver. It references a letter of support that's on page 36 of the staff packet. On page 36 of the staff packet, I see a letter of support of the AHFC application. However, I don't see that it's an application for the in support of the variance. And I also note that the signature of on the letter is Jerry Weaver. He's also signed the reviewed page on page 11 of the packet, saying he is in concurrence with the staff's findings. Could you provide some clarification of that? Does the Director of Community Development support allowing the variance?
Mr. Chair, the date on the letter is September 8th, 2010. That was signed by Jerry. I'm writing in support of the application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It says nothing about, it talks about for the demolition and reconstruction of public housing units located on Boston Street. There is no reference in the letter to a variance. This is a letter that is in support of the goal of Anchorage neighborhood, Anchorage AHFC, Anchorage Housing Finance Corporation. And the request for variance should not be confused with the respect for the goals of Anchorage Housing Finance and what they are doing and the services that they provide to the municipality of Anchorage. There is no question that the goals and the program are doing valid and vital things for the municipality of Anchorage in providing low-cost, affordable housing to folks that are low income. However, the fact that Jerry, the department director, signed the packet for the variance means that we agree with what you're doing, but you have to do it within the limitations of the regulations that apply to your property. There was part of the argument that was presented by Anchorage Housing Finance was that there was an agreement between the municipality and AHFC to provide low-income housing, and the argument was that based on this agreement, the municipality must do everything it can to help provide those 200 units that are the subject of the agreement. However, the municipality is subject to the rules and regulations every bit as much as any other applicant coming forward before the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. In that light, Mr. Weaver has to abide by the same rules and regulations as any member of the public coming forward as the representative of the department.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Ms. O'Brien? Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not necessarily a question, but more of a comment. From everything that I've read and everything that's been stated, it seems to me that this is the same exact case as that's mentioned in resolution number 2011-027. And in my eyes, I see this more as an appeal. So if other board members feel the same, and if it's appropriate, I would deny this based on it already previously being denied and recommend that the petitioner go to the Supreme Court if needed.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Are there other comments by any of the board members? Ms. Dole.
As a comment to Mr. Hart's comment, I'm not sure if we deny it, we're not somehow accepting that we have jurisdiction to hear it, as opposed to somehow determining we don't have jurisdiction to hear this before us. But I do agree that, or I do have the same concerns in that it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the board's decisions are final, and that from what I'm hearing, it sounds like this is the same request that was, that nothing has changed, and this is an improper request.
Thank you, Ms. Dole. Mr. Vague.
Mr. Chairman, during my years of experience on this board, I can think of a couple of occasions where we've had an issue that came up like this, where we've asked for legal opinion from the municipality on an issue like this, and I wonder if that isn't a better course here than simply denying it, and it gives an opportunity for the municipality's legal department to weigh in on whether we can hear this.
Thank you, Mr. Vague. Perhaps, just my comment would be perhaps we consider a motion to postpone pending and making that request to the municipality's legal department to ensure that we can hear this case. I'll throw that out for discussion. Mr. Hart.
I would be in agreement with that, Mr. Chair. That seems more appropriate to me than just strictly denying it.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Thank you. Perhaps I'd entertain a motion. Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the board postpone case number 2013-099 indefinitely pending legal review by municipal council regarding the standing of the ZEBA board and our ability to hear this case.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Hart, you've indicated you'd second that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Ron, you speak to your motion or care to speak to your motion?
Nothing to add. In addition to the discussion already placed, would add a date certain, but don't think it's appropriate to do so, not knowing when municipal council may have a response for us. But recommend that we hear the case at the next regular board meeting after that response is received.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Hart, any further comments?
No comments, Mr. Chair.
Are there any other comments by any of the other board members? I concur with and intend to support the motion. Concerned that we've heard from staff that this is the same application as what we've heard before. So if it is, should we be hearing it? And if not, what's the new information? So I intend to support the motion as well. Any other discussion? If not, please vote.
I had to clear it. Could you please put your votes in again?
It's not taking our vote. Nope. Okay, let me just. That motion to postpone passes by a vote of 7-0. The petitioner and applicant could speak with staff as far as when we will, what the timeline. Can't really give a timeline on when we'll get a response from legal. We'll hear it if and when we get the determination back accordingly. That brings us back to case 2011-21, or I'm sorry, that's today's date. Case 2013-039. I understand we've received a letter of authority, and for the record, Ms. Dole has recused herself. Ms. Ferguson, we have a letter. Have you had an opportunity to receive this letter?
Yes, I have a copy here, and it is a letter of authorization.
Do you have one of these? And based on your review of this letter, is this sufficient to proceed with the case?
Mr. Chair, yes, it is.
Thank you. So the public hearing was, not the public hearing, the staff presentation was made. Are there any further questions of staff by the board? Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hate to be overly bureaucratic, but I noticed that the title of the individual in that letter was Vice President. Does the municipality or does the zoning board have a specific standard that has to be met as far as the individual that signs those letters? And the reason for the question is the organization I work for, Vice President means a certain thing, and I know that no Vice President would be able to sign this type of letter at my organization. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Through the chair, Mr. Hart, I think the vice president of the corporation is sufficient.
Thank you. I believe on legal documents that we've had with the city in the past, it's been president, vice president, or corporate officer, I believe. So it's my understanding it's an acceptable title, but are there any other discussion by any of the board members? I apologize. There were two different letters. One was from, just for the record, one was from corporate leasing, and it said sole member, so I was a little thrown off. But then we also have the letter from Northwest and Simon, signed by Arthur Felsher, who's the vice president. Are there any other discussion with respect to Mr. Hart's comments? I just want to make sure we've addressed, or Mr. Hart, your concerns or comments. Was there? You'd made a comment, I guess. I'm playing catch up here a little bit. I apologize.
You answered my question, Mr. Chair, when you stated that in the past it's been president, vice president. I think you said one or two other titles. So you answered my question, sir.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? If not, I believe we are ready for the presentation by the applicant. Mr. Potter, you've indicated you've stated and spelled your name for the record. I'm assuming the spelling is still the same?
Yes, I have a couple of things I would like to hand out.
Thank you. And Mr. Potter, you have 10 minutes for your presentation, and again, we must find that all 7 standards are met, so if you'll make sure your presentation addresses this.
Substantially met.
Substantially met. If you'll make sure your presentation at least discusses those. And we will have to keep one copy of these for 30 days.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, again, for the record, my name is Tim Potter.
1 minute, Mr. Potter. Okay. You can proceed.
Okay. I've attempted to hand out a couple of things to all of the board members. One is a couple of photos of the Reeve Building, what's known as the Reeve Building, where the Crush Cafe is, with the Anchorage Fifth Avenue Mall. I've also passed out written findings, if you're interested, of why we believe that all 7 standards have been substantially met. The final 2 email and letter comments are to reflect that, in fact, we did have a pre-application meeting with the director of the Community Development Department, Mr. Jerry Weaver. And it was based on his recommendation following that meeting that this was the right approach to get to where everybody needed to be. So I wanted to answer that question first, of that when Mr. Ron asked the question of, well, is there an appropriate method? And in fact, the director indicated that this was the appropriate approach. You'll see also in line with that there's acknowledgement that there will be a requirement when we take the fragment lot subdivision back to the plating board. We will have to ask for dimensional variance from them for lot depth from front to back because it will not meet the 100 feet. And we're confident that we can get that. But that's a separate board, separate issue, not for you to consider tonight. So we did quite a bit of work getting direction on how this approach should be taken. I'm not quite sure why the staff has taken the position they have, and quite frankly, I can't understand that hand-delivered copies of letters of authorization that you submit with your application don't get into the staff packet and almost cause a delay as it caused tonight. So with that, I'll try and keep that the level of my irritation for the start of the presentation. We're requesting a variance, as the staff indicated, to allow less than minimum lot size lot of 2,500 square feet when the typical minimum standard is 6,000 square feet in the B2A zoning district. This is downtown. We're requesting that the 2 existing lots, one of which the Reeve Building sits partially on, be basically reconfigured so that there's a 2,500 square foot lot rather than 6,000, and the remaining 3,500 square feet from that 6,000 square foot fragment lot would then be absorbed by the adjacent fragment lot. If any of you are curious what a fragment lot subdivision is in the commercial tract ordinance that was brought forward in about 1982-83, I'd be more than happy to try and respond to those questions. If granted this variance, it would allow the lot to be that's under the old Reeve Building, now the Crush Cafe, to be exactly the same size as the existing building. And I put those photos out there for you so you could actually see how it is wrapped on 2 sides. So for extraordinary circumstances, the Reeve Building is effectively wrapped on 2 sides by a 500,000 square foot plus urban mall, downtown Anchorage, Alaska. It is the only example of this situation that I know of, and I've been doing this for 32 years in town. So it is unique. Imagine that, less than 1% of the total square footage of just that structure, let alone the parking garage and the other block that's east of there that was fully flattened, is involved in this situation. Again, it is unique. There is no other example. There is a really interesting history to the Reeve Building. Originally, because I was involved in the Anchorage Fifth Avenue Mall project, acquiring all the properties with the developer, doing all the fragment lot subdivision work, all the variances that were required, conditional uses that were required for the project. I can tell you it was a very complicated project. But at that point, the hopes of the Reeve family was that that building would be retained in the family and become a Reeve family museum. Time has passed. That goal went away as patriarch and matriarch of the family passed on, and that's no longer the case. So the original premise has changed. And the original premise of the overall project was that because of all of the different moving parts, conditional uses and variances that were required, when the staff indicated that we would need another variance for a smaller than 6,000 square foot minimum lot size for the fragment lot, the Rainier Fund, or Eagle Properties at the time, determined that it would be probably better to not go for a variance at that time because that might be the one that would break the camel's back. Again, it was a very complex development, as you can still see today. It's the only one of its kind in town. So with that, things move forward, and the owner, if this variance is not granted, is effectively deprived the ability of owning the lot under the building and structure. And that's very critical for a couple of reasons. If you can look to the map that is on page 46 of your packet, you'll see that this is not the only sub 6,000 square foot lot in downtown Anchorage. There's a phenomenon within downtown and the fabric of the downtown platting that there were a lot of deed platted lots where half lots, quarter lots in all different directions were done. So many of the single family old original town site homes that are downtown actually sit on a smaller than 6,000 square foot lot. So it's not an abnormal thing. It's actually part of kind of the interest of downtown. But they would be deprived, yes, by a real estate standpoint, the ability to get financing, to be able to do additions to the building, to do all kinds of things to the building, or eventually expand the building, because it's terribly difficult to get financing for a project that you don't own the property for, and even more difficult to get financing for a building that is on land which is half of a lot that somebody else has and actually has part of the mall structure on it as well. So it is very different. I think we want to make sure that we keep buildings in downtown in a condition, both ownership-wise, zoning-wise, everything else, that they can be maintained, they can be kept up, they can be altered to meet the changing needs of the community. Condition number 3, this really was a pre-existing condition to the current owner, Corporate Leasing, and the current tenant, Crush. So this is not a situation created by either of those parties. Clearly, there would be no adverse impacts. Keeping with the intent of the code, the history of the area is really a concern. When the commercial tract fragment lot subdivision ordinance was brought up from King County, Washington, the Seattle area, the initial ordinance that Greg Jones and I wrote that would go through the process did not include a minimum lot size because that was not the track record or the way it was done down in the Seattle area. The Rainier Fund brought this ordinance up so that they could actually get some different financing programs going with the Northway Mall. In that vein, the city, the staff, was concerned that because this was such a new thing, that if it was anything less than 6,000 square feet, it might not be an independent, standalone piece of property. Over the last 30 years since the ordinance went into place, there has not been a failure of a commercial tract fragment lot subdivision in the vein that the city was concerned about. And in fact, what's really different here, I believe this is the only fragment lot site plan and fragment lot subdivision in downtown. And in that vein, being able to stand alone would suggest that you need to have on-site parking on your lot. And in the B2 zoning district, you are not required to have required parking. So you can actually have a functional situation where this lot actually fronts on a publicly dedicated and constructed road, which is one of the requirements of a lot, and it is not required to have required parking. because in the B2 zoning districts, that's not a requirement. So having a lot that's less than the minimum standard in this specific case, given how the structure of the mall envelopes this building, and the fact that it does have its own standalone frontage, I think is really the exceptions and shows that this is a very unique situation in our city. This is the minimum variance that can be asked for. The variance would create a lot that results in a lot that is exactly the same size as the foundation of the building. Will it affect the health and welfare adversely? Absolutely not. There effectively will be no change that anyone will be able to tell. And really, items 4 through 7 are ones that historically I've come before the zoning board and said, you know, there is a practical, reasonable person test, and that is if a reasonable person is walking down the sidewalk or they are driving down 5th Avenue or 6th Avenue and they look at this, can they tell that it's not the way it's supposed to be? And in fact, I challenge any of you to say that anyone in the general public or yourselves would know. Most of the public doesn't even aware that the Crush building, the Reeve building, is actually part of a fragment lot that extends into the mall. So in conclusion, I really believe that this is a unique situation. There is no one like it in town, let alone downtown. There's been no objection in the reviews by all of the review agencies. There's been no public adverse comment. In fact, no public comment against it at all. And we believe that we substantially meet the 7 requirements as written in the 7 findings in front of you. We would request your approval. We'd be happy to answer any questions with the remaining time. And please do, because there is a lot of history that goes back 30 years with the fragment lot subdivision approach, how it's been done and what it really is. And if you don't understand it, please ask for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. You have 41 seconds. I'm assuming you could reserve that for rebuttal, although I'm not sure there will be much public comments. Are there any questions of Mr. Potter by the board? Mr. Vig.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Potter. You know, the thing that I struggle with here in this case is standard number 3, the hardship not being self-imposed. And typically we hear cases where a property owner buys a residential property or commercial property where unbeknownst to them there's an encroachment of some sort into a setback. But here we have a situation where clearly the transaction history of the property, all of the people involved knew that the underlying property was not attached to the building. So how does that square with the standard?
Well, it's very interesting that I can tell you that the reason that there wasn't pushback from the developer originally to go for a variance was the overwhelming complexity of all the moving parts of the mall, the parking structure, sidewalk column variances for width of the sidewalk by the parking garage, all kinds of things. The conditional uses for a 2-story sky bridge, a diagonal sky bridge, all kinds of things. Totally different thing. At that point in time, and it's very important that you look at that point in time, the CCR document that was set up was dealing with certain owners, certain people, and it did set up a program by which that would be governed. And while the Reeves owned the building, everything was perfect. When they decided that they weren't going to maintain it within the family and they sold it, yes, corporate leasing understood where the lot line was and where their building sat and everything else. But within the purchase and sale agreement reflected as part of the CCR document, there's an allowance that if in fact a variance for a smaller lot could be processed and a subdivision done that would create a smaller than 6,000 square foot lot to reflect the size of the building, they would then sell that 2,500 square feet to the new owner of the property. And it's been that way all the way along. So within this very complex real estate deal, there was that ability to do that. And up until this time, it hasn't been necessary to exercise that. And now we're going forward. But, you know, did they buy the building understanding that that was the case? Yes. And they understood that they needed to do something to address that issue, because at some point they would need to be able to finance. You know about the financing world as many of the other rest of you do. It's getting harder and harder and more difficult to get financing for projects. At that point in time, Simon's had the land, they've got deep pockets, everything's fine. So within this project type, the owner of the building is now moving forward to try and get fee simple ownership of the property below the building, which was originally considered in the initial deal. I think the bigger question is, why wasn't this fixed as part of Title 21 rewrite? I think that was clearly an oversight, because in the 30 years that the ordinance has been on the table and active, dealing with RO zoning, B3 zoning, I-1 and I-2 zoning, Diamond Center originally was done as a fragment lot subdivision when it was still zoned I-1. It's been rezoned to B3 since then. It's also a commercial tract subdivision. But this is the only one that had an existing building that was there that was basically absorbed as a pimple onto the side of a 500,000 square foot plus building. And that is unique. And I believe we've created a situation where that building is ripe for future demise, and I think it's an important thing to try and resolve. And when it's a situation where I believe all of the 7 conditions are substantially met, and it does create a hardship, and a hardship that's not good for the city, and the end result, with the fee simple ownership of the 2,500 square feet, the owner of the building and current tenant of that building who would like to buy that will be more able to get financing associated with upgrades to the building, both inside and out, and make it a more dynamic part of the community. That's it.
Thank you.
Are there other questions of the petitioner by the board? I have a couple questions. Mr. Potter, you said you thought it was should have been addressed in Title 21. What or how would your recommendation have been for addressing it in Title 21?
Well, going back 30 years to when the ordinance was originally brought forward by Greg Jones and I on behalf of the Rainier Fund, we could have gone back to that approach where there was not a minimum lot size. But clearly, Title 21, in the rewrite, it would have been very simple to create a situation where you just say that in the B2 zoning districts where there is no required parking, that the 6,000 square foot minimum lot size is exempt for fragment lot subdivision and not have that requirement.
Two other questions following that. So the 2,500 square foot lot size is the size necessary for the, and I'm restating, I realize, or paraphrasing what's in your application perhaps, but what's necessary for that fully developed? I mean, the building covers that majority of that 2,500 square feet. All the utilities are provided through the frag lot process or through the
Correct.
Adjacent utilities in the right-of-way.
Right. And that property would still be subject to the CCR documents that handle maintenance of common space, utilities, maintenance of those utilities, all that. So there really be no change from that operational standpoint either.
And my third question, one of your handouts that you provided that wasn't in our packet was, and I read it at the end, an email from Jerry Weaver.
Yes.
Stating, I don't know if all the board members have had a chance.
Connie Hickok, who is a staff member of mine, did a review, because she was in attendance at the meeting, with Mr. Dawson on behalf of Corporate Leasing and Mr. Weaver, and she went ahead and wrote up what she believed was kind of the minutes of the meeting and sent those to Jerry to see if, in fact, what we understood coming from that meeting was what he understood. And his answer is very clear that, yes, that was a good summary of what we talked about. And that clearly that going this direction was the right approach and the right vehicle to address this issue. And that's why we're here.
And I don't have the email in front of me, but I'll paraphrase that it was in support. We've also got a write-up from staff, again, with Jerry Weaver's signature, recommending denial, based on these standards not being met. Can you provide maybe your opinion, or we as a board have to, find that?
I really wish Jerry was here.
Yeah.
I actually think that he is quite embarrassed by having his signature on a recommendation for denial. When this case was coming forward earlier, we went back and did some additional historical review so that people could understand what fragment lots were and why that size limit was on there and all that. And on that basis, Mr. Weaver indicated to me that the department would be supportive. And when I got the copy of the case packet, I was very surprised to see his signature on it. I called him and asked him on Monday or Tuesday, what was going on. And he simply asked me, well, what's the status of the case? Is it going to be coming forward shortly? And I said, Jerry, you signed the review and the recommendations. And he said, I did. I'm not trying to throw Jerry under the bus, but that's what happened. And Michelle Ritter, also a staff person, was on the speakerphone with me and heard that. So I believe that he's given some direction to the staff tonight to not go very far with their discussion concerning denial, and wish me luck.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Are there other questions of the board of the applicant by the board? Excuse me. Any other questions? Does staff have any questions of the applicant? Petitioner?
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions for the applicant, but there is a comment I wanted to make, and it regards the letter of authorization. I've gone through, there were two submittals. Originally, Dow had submitted for the April 11th ZEBA meeting, but they decided to withdraw and postpone that application once they understood that we were recommending denial. And so we had a meeting, and the outcome of that meeting was we recommended that they revise their submittal to try and strengthen their argument. And so they went back and revised their submittal and resubmitted it for tonight's meeting. And in the first application, the first submittal, they did have the letter of authorization, and it is that one that has the letterhead from Northwestern Simon Incorporated dated January 2nd. That was in their first submittal. But in their second submittal, their revised application, that letter of authorization was missing. So I've discovered what happened there. That's all I have.
Thank you. No further questions by the board of the petitioner. With that, I believe we will open this for public hearing. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have any rebuttal?
Mr. Chair, I do not.
Does applicant have any rebuttal?
The only rebuttal would be to clarify a couple of things that have been represented here tonight. Number one, we did not withdraw our first application. We did ask for a postponement and pay the postponement fee, and then we did supplement the application. Secondly, there is a very interesting and I think troubling suggestion by the staff that this would set a terrible precedent and that every strip mall in town would then want every piece of property under a specific little unit to be its own separate little fragment lot. That suggests that everyone going through the process will have gone through a fragment lot subdivision that's done a strip mall, and that's just not the case. So for a property, as she's talking about, to get to that condition, they would also have to go through, number one, the plating board and a fragment lot subdivision, which the public could comment on, and they could then, secondly, they would have to go for a variance to be below the 6,000 minimum square feet. So I think this rush to the door or the application counter at the planning department of all the strip malls in town is fluff that is apples and oranges and meant to confuse the board, because it's not relevant and it won't happen, and it's put in there, I think, just to try and create a reason, another reason to try and not support the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. One question. In the past, we've had a standard requiring if a variance is granted that it, in conformance with a site plan that's submitted. And bear with me again, this might be a question that's been addressed in your submittal. If this were to be approved tonight for a 2,500 square foot lot, would the frag lot require the site plan associated with that frag lot? What shows what's on that 2,500 square foot lot, and that down the road, what's there to protect
The
the
commercial
city?
tract fragment lot subdivision then requires that all buildings, all landscaping, anything associated with the site development is actually reflected on that. So it's more like an ALTA survey as far as showing the buildings and the constructed site. So you'll see street trees, you'll see everything, where the light posts are, all that will be on that fragment lot site plan. The plazas that out in front of the crushed building, the Reed building, will also be shown. So it will be a reflection of effectively what you see on the photograph. If you look on, let's see, the page 9 of your case packet that shows the aerial photo, effectively everything that is on the site associated with the entire mall property, because that's the larger commercial tract. All the yellow lines that you see that are fragment lots, we have to include everything that's within that outside boundary of that commercial tract. So each one of the fragment lots will be shown, and any improvements on any of those fragment lots will also be shown.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
And then additionally, that's recorded at the recorder's office. So,
Thank you. With that, I believe the matter rests with the board. Thank you, Mr. Potter. With respect to case 2013-039, I would like a positive motion from a board member, please. And just in case anyone's wondering, we have no other cases besides this evening, so if we want to go, we have to act, but not that we're in a rush. It's just a statement. Mr. Vig.
Mr. Chairman, in case number 2013-039, I move that we grant a variance from AMC 2140-150 F2, minimum lot requirements, to allow a reduction in required lot size in the Central Business District from 6,000 square feet to 2,500 square feet, subject to condition number 1 on page 6 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Ron, you've indicated you would second that motion?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Vig. Would you speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I commend the applicant for presenting a very well-reasoned and thorough case, and I have to admit I do struggle with standards 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to skip over those for the moment and jump to standard 4. I agree with the staff that the variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property. I think it's demonstrated its the current use and adjacency with the commercial structure. The mall has not been an issue. That won't change. Standard number 5, I believe, is substantially met. As staff mentioned, that the variance, if granted, is in keeping with the intent of the code, will not change the character of the zoning district. Standard number 6, I believe, is substantially met, that the variance, if granted, will not adversely affect health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality. Clearly, it's been in that situation for 25-plus years and without any apparent ill effects. Standard number 7, the variance granted is the minimum that will make possible a reasonable use of the land. I think there is a case to be made for a reasonable use of the land having an attachment with the structure that sits on the land, and that it's the minimum that would allow that structure to be contained within the frag lot. So I believe that standard is met. But going back to standards 1, 2, and 3, with regard to the physical circumstances of the property, it is a very unique physical circumstance, no question about it. I have in my mind a belief that it's at least partially met. Articulating that is something I'm struggling with, and coming up with a reasoned explanation is difficult, but I'm willing to consider the views of some of the other board members and hear some thoughts on those first 3 standards. Perhaps standard 1 and 2 are a little more clear in my mind, that there's some obvious physical circumstances of the proximity of the large commercial development adjacent to it. Standard 3, like I mentioned in my question to Mr. Potter, this has been something that subsequent purchasers of the property have been aware of, and I'd like to hear some other thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Vig, thank you for the motion and speaking to the standards as you did. I concur with your findings in standards 4 through 7, and we'll briefly speak to findings 1 through 3. I do intend to support the motion, but would appreciate continued conversation on the motion before us. Regarding standard number 1, I do find that the petitioner has met the burden of proof necessary, at least to me, regarding physical circumstances and the uniqueness of this fragment lot. I chuckled and also find value in the comment about it being a pimple of sorts. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't really care for pimples, and dealing with them can be a challenge nonetheless here. I do find that standard 1 is at least partially met for those reasons of uniqueness regarding the built-up infrastructure around this fragment lot. I'm struggling a little bit with standard number 2, but I'll carry forward the unique physical circumstances from standard 1. The issue I'm having is with the undue hardship upon the property owner. There's been much discussion this evening about the role of the property owner in this case. To me, that has been settled by the authorization letter that's been provided to us tonight. Regarding undue hardship to that property owner is another question. Clearly, the petitioner has vested potential future interest in the outcome of this case. And in that sense, the property owner does as well on the flip side of that coin. So therefore, I can find that there will be hardship unduly placed upon the property owner for strict application of this code, and find that standard 2 is met. Regarding standard number 3, and discussion thus far on the hardship not being self-imposed, I think it's been discussed and discovered that the petitioner had knowledge. There's been a long history associated with this fragment lot, and that to me adds value to the fact that this wasn't a case of ignorance and that can't be claimed. I find that the petitioner did not impose that hardship any more so than any other owner of the building at this property would be imposing that hardship, not self-imposed in that sense. So I find that standard number 3 can be met as well. For those reasons, I intend to support the motion, but would appreciate further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the previous board members' comments with respect to every finding except for standard number 3. If I've heard everything correctly, and if my understanding is correctly, they purchased the building knowing very well that the land underneath it wasn't owned. So I personally feel that that is a self-imposed hardship. I personally would not purchase a business on a building on land that wasn't owned. That's a personal feeling of mine. And owning 3 pieces of real estate personally, I think I have a little bit of knowledge about that. So my personal feeling, standard number 3 isn't met, and I do not intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Patrick?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments of the other board members, and I do agree with Mr. Hart, too. That was what I was struggling with, but I consider this, they went into this with full knowledge and knew what the implications was. And I do agree with staff about the issue of setting a precedence, be it in a strip mall or anything else. People will take it and they can run with it anywhere they want to, and that is a very big concern of mine, but I do not intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Are there any other comments? Any of the board members? I will just weigh in. I do intend to support the motion, concurring with the findings of Mr. Vig and Mr. Ron, struggling with standard number 3 the most. However, you know, the standard is the hardship is not self-imposed and special conditions and circumstances do not result from the actions of the applicant. I also look at as a whole with the history of the project, of the property, the frag lot, the timing. This was relatively new, and there's been documentation of how it's been applied throughout the city. And that is one of the, probably the crux of why I think this board exists is for standard 3. And it's one we struggle with. But for the reasons mentioned by Mr. Vig and Mr. Ron, I intend to support the motion. Please vote. That motion fails by a vote of 3 yes and 3 no votes. For the record, I will read, every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. That is our last case of this evening. Reports. Mr. Ron, thank you. And for the record, I will not be in Oregon next month, just so you know. Don't look for me. I believe Mr. Dunham or Ms. Willard will be here next week or next month, so my term as chair will have ended after one meeting.
Mr. Ron won't be here next meeting, and
Mr. Patrick,
Patrick and Ron. Okay.
was there any other board members that know they will not be here on August 8th? Okay. Any other reports from any of the other members? Board member comments? Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this is really a question to staff. Is it? I'll be out of the state up until I think a day before the next meeting, and knowing that I won't be able to get the packet, the printed packet in person. Is there any possibility of that being scanned and emailed out to board members?
Yeah, don't we normally do that? Yeah, anyway, yeah, because I'm not as familiar with this board as I am the other ones, and we always do it for the other ones, so I assume we do the same. So yes, you will receive the email version of it.
You'll receive an email that's a short version because it only has the actual staff report, not the attachments.
Yeah.
However, at the same time that we send out the packets to the board members, it's also posted on the municipal website with the full attachment under municipal meetings website. Have you been to that website? Then it'll show as an upcoming meeting, and when you click on the agenda, each item has a link, and when you hit it, all the attachments will be on the right, and you'll be able to view them right there. So you'll get the email, short versions, and then go to the website, and you'll see the full version.
Perhaps Lori could do us a favor and include that link in a follow-up email after she emails
That would be nice.
short packet out.
Be easier for everybody. Yeah. Are there any other comments by any of the board members? Are we having any discussion on parliamentary procedures this evening? Oh, thanks. Any other comments? I guess, Ms. Ferguson, I guess both cases were fairly complicated from my end, and I wish Ms. O'Brien was here. The case that we postponed pending legal action, I don't want to speak for any of the other board members, but I struggled with hearing this is the exact same case, this is the exact same variance that we've denied in the past.
And why it came forward again?
Yeah, yeah.
I can take that to Ms. O'Brien tomorrow,
Yeah.
and perhaps she could email you all with an answer or response to that.
Well, I think, and
That-
again, if we get something from legal that says we can
Okay.
hear it, is what
Okay.
we're looking for, what I'm looking for. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry if somehow I've just blanked this out, but did we actually approve the resolutions that are part of the agenda already? We did?
That was on the consent agenda,
Yes.
and we approved the consent agenda?
Okay, sorry, I blanked that out.
Okay, so you wanted to have a legal opinion from prior to next month's meeting?
Not necessarily prior to next month.
Was
Just
it
prior
postponed?
to us hearing that
Was it postponed till next month or date uncertain?
date uncertain
Okay.
that we have?
So legal opinion prior to hearing the case again?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mr. Patrick?
You know, on that case, I agree with what we're doing with it, hearing legal, but I think, even though it may have been the same exact ordinance, I remember that case, and I believe at the time it was a parking issue. They had angled parking on it, it didn't meet the 6 or 8 or whatever it had to meet. And I think looking at it, they had 8 parking spots this time, and I think that was the difference.
And I didn't want to get into.
I didn't either.
No, because
That's why
I
didn't bring it
remember,
up.
I remember seeing a different one
Yep.
that there were
Yep.
4 staggered, and I don't know if it was on this case. I remember seeing 4 staggered,
it was.
significantly different
Yes.
site plan, but I don't know if that was this case or not. Any other comments? Okay, if not, we are adjourned.
I think it was miraculous that Mr. Ron had to leave